Hello, my dear students. I hope you are doing fine and good. So I continue with you today this chapter number 7, and it is about firms and competitive markets. Of course, I remind you that this chapter is based on the textbook by Gregory Mankiw. Textbook's title is Principles of Macroeconomics, and the slides are those of Professor Ron Cronovich. Okay, let's start. So here we talk about this chapter, firms in competitive markets. In this title, I think we can divide it into two parts. The first part is about firms. So here in this chapter, we are going to talk about firms and more precisely the behavior of firms. When we talked about the behavior of consumers in the previous chapter, here we are going to talk about the behavior of another economic agent in the economy, that is firms. And by behavior, we mean how these firms are making decisions about what? About production and about pricing. So in this chapter, we talk about how firms make decisions about especially two important things. That is, production means how much should the firm produce? What is the quantity to be produced? What is the best quantity to be produced by a firm in its in the product that this firm is producing? And what should the price be? What the price that the firm should decide? Okay, so it is about the behavior in making decisions about production, quantity of production, and pricing. The second part of this chapter, of this title, is competitive markets. When we talk about competitive market, I mean here we talk about market structure. The market structure. The market structure is related to the degree of competition in a market. So in this chapter 7, we will talk about market that competitive. So it seems from this title that the firm's decision making about production and about pricing depends on the market structure, on the degree of competition in the market. So if a market is, it seems here that if the competition changes, decision making of the firm should not be the same. If we change from a market structure to another, we expect that firm's behavior changes according to this market behavior. So here, in the coming chapter, in more advanced macroeconomics, we'll see that there is behavior that in a monopolistic competition, or in a monopoly or oligopoly. So there will be different market structure, and for each market structure, there is a different behavior of the firm. So a firm in a market, her decision making depends on its market structure. So here we go, what we are going to see. So in this chapter, so let me hide this camera and go to this chapter where we will define what we mean by perfectly competitive market. What is the marginal revenue, and how is it related to total and average revenue? And here, how does the competitive firm determine the quantity that maximizes profit? So here we talk about decision. I just spoke about earlier. So about the decision, how the firm determines the quantity that it should produce. Of course, the quantity that the firm should produce should be the best number of units. And what is the best number of units? It's the number of units produced that make the firm reaching the highest profit possible. Like the consumer who tries to reach the highest satisfaction he can get from his or her buying, a firm also should produce a number of units of its products that makes her reaching the highest profit possible. And we will answer this question in this chapter. When might a competitive firm shut down in the short run or exit the market in the long run? And what does the market supply curve look like in the short run and in the long run? So here are the questions that we are going to answer in this chapter. So introduction, we start with this scenario. 3 years after graduating, you run your own business. You must decide how much to produce, what price to charge, how many workers to hire, etc. So you have many questions to answer in your business when you start your business. And of course, you want to make the best decision for your firm. And the two most important decisions are about production and about price. What factors should affect these decisions? Your costs and how much competition you face. So the decisions about production and price depends on the cost. That is why we had an entire chapter about the costs in the previous chapter. They are because costs are important factors in our decision making about production, etc. And this decision depends on the competition in this market. So we begin by studying the behavior of firms in perfectly competitive markets. So in this chapter, we will work in a market we call perfectly competitive market. So it is a specific type of markets called in the economic theory perfectly competitive market. So what do you mean by a perfectly competitive market? There are three points that define a competitive market. First, many buyers and many sellers. There are many buyers and many sellers in this market. By many, we mean hundreds and thousands, not just few. Second point that defines perfect competition is that the goods offered for sale are largely the same. So the goods are identical. The goods sold by the sellers are identical. And firms can freely enter or exit the market. Any firm can enter the market at any time and exit the market at any time without any costs. So because of the point 1 and 2, each buyer and seller is a price taker. Takes the price. Price taker means that any seller and any buyer is taking the price as a given variable. So there is no decision about prices. The prices are taken. Why? Because there are many buyers and many sellers in the market. The competition is very hard, very strong. So if someone decides a price, try to decide a price, and someone else another seller can offer a lower price than him, So, and because there are many sellers in this market, so for the buyers there are many options. So they can freely choose from whom they buy. Of course, they will choose from the one who charge them the lowest price, the cheapest price possible. So as a seller, you find yourself obliged to, in order to be able to sell your product, you are obliged to take the price from the market. You should follow the market. The first point is called the first hypothesis is called atomicity. Hypothesis of atomicity, many buyers and many sellers. The second hypothesis here, it's called the hypothesis of product homogeneity. And here the third hypothesis, it's called free exit, free entry, free entry and free exit. Okay. So these three hypotheses, the first that characterize perfect competition in a market, we call a market as perfectly competitive if these three hypotheses exist in the same time. The first hypothesis of atomicity, many buyers and many sellers. The hypothesis of product homogeneity, that the goods offered are by all sellers are the same, identical. And the third assumption is free exit and free entry. So here are the three characteristics or the three assumptions that should define perfect competition. We call a market as perfectly competitive if these three assumptions exist at the same time. The first assumption is the assumption of atomicity, and the second is the assumption of product homogeneity, and the third is the assumption of free entry and free exit. Any firm can enter the market and exit from the market at any time without any cost or without any impediment or obstacle. So the first two assumptions make the buyers and the sellers price takers. Means that the price is given by the market. None of them is able to decide its own price. Because if you decide your own price, you risk to not be able to sell any of your goods, because there is a seller that is next to you, just next to you, who can sell at a cheaper price. So the total revenue of a firm TR is equal to as price times quantity. So this makes the average revenue AR as equal to total revenue over quantity. Okay, and if we replace total revenue by price here, by price times Q, we get that our average revenue is equal to the price. Price here is given, it is a fixed parameter. So the average revenue in a competitive market is equal to the price of this in this market. The marginal revenue is the change in total revenue from selling one more unit. MR is delta TR over delta Q. So we can compute this new these parameters in this table. Here we have, in this example, for example, we have different quantities. We have price that is equal to $10. It is here given by the market and means that any unit of this good is priced at $10 in this market. So any seller should sell at $10. So the total revenue is price times quantity, and we can fill this space. We can get that total revenue. We can complete the total revenue column. The average revenue is total revenue over quantity. You see that the average revenue is exactly equal to the price. The average revenue is $10 and the price is $10. The marginal revenue is the change in total revenue over the change in Q. And we get also that the change in total and that the marginal revenue is also $10. Notice that the marginal revenue is equal to the price. So here notice in this market, in a perfectly competitive market, that the price given by the market is equal to the marginal revenue, which is also equal to the average revenue. You can add here equals also to the average revenue. So here we can find such equality only in a perfectly competitive market. Why? Because the price in a competitive market is a fixed, is given and fixed parameter. So in competitive market, marginal revenue is equal price. So a competitive firm can keep increasing its output without affecting the market price. So no matter how in a competitive market a firm can increase or decrease its output, the price will be always the same. It does not change. So this is one of the important characteristic of a competitive firm, competitive market. A firm in competitive market is called competitive firm. When we say competitive firm, we mean a firm in a perfectly competitive market. So each one unit increase in Q causes revenue to rise by price. That is why marginal revenue is equal price. So any additional unit I produce and I sell in this market will rise my revenue by the price, by an amount equal to the price. So this marginal revenue equals price is only true for firms in competitive markets. Only true for firms in competitive markets. So here to show the importance of the structure of the market in decision making about prices, and also, as we will see later, about also quantities. So here we go, profit maximization. A firm is considered as for-profit organization, so naturally its objective should be to maximize its profit. And to maximize its profit, all her decisions should be aiming to realize these objectives. When we talk about decision making, we talk about production, number of units that should be produced, and also pricing as well. Here, for a firm in competitive market, the question of pricing is not important here. Why? Because the price is given by the market, so it is a fixed and or it is fixed parameter that the firm should take from the market. So the firm is not able to make a decision about its prices. So it should behave with prices very passively. Just go to the market and sell at the price of the market. So here there is no decision about prices. What the firm can, a firm in competitive market make decision about is here is production, the quantity that should be produced, and the quantity that should be produced is the quantity that maximizes profit. So what quantity maximizes the firm profit? To find this answer, we come back to that famous principle we have seen in the first chapter, that is think at the margin. So in this case, in this frame, what do we mean by think at the margin? Here, what does it mean? If increase in Q by 1 unit, revenue rises by MR, and costs rise by marginal cost. So a producer will compare what is always in making decision about producing more or less. The producer will think at the margin. What do you mean by think at the margin? Means he will compare what is the revenue that coming from one more unit produced, and what is the cost of this one more unit produced. So this is the meaning of think at the margin. Of this, if this extra unit or additional unit has a marginal revenue that is higher than its marginal cost, then increase Q to raise profit. So it is good decision to increase the quantity, because by increasing the quantity, this producer can raise his profit, because the marginal the revenue from this additional unit is higher than its cost, that is marginal cost. Here we talk about one revenue of 1 unit, that is marginal revenue, and the cost of this 1 unit, that is marginal cost. If the opposite happens, if the marginal revenue is lower than the marginal cost, so then it is better to reduce the quantity, and not to raise, because by reducing the quantity we raise the profit. Here, because the marginal revenue from this additional unit is lower than its cost, so reducing it will make the producer losing a part of his profits. So it is better to not producing it, and then it is better to decrease the quantity produced. So you see here that the profit maximizations depends on this very important variable, that is the marginal cost, that should always be compared with the marginal revenue to be able to determine when we should increase the quantity produced to raise profit, or when the quantity produced should be reduced to raise profits. So we continue the previous table here. Here we have the quantities from 0 to 5. We completed the total revenue, price times quantity for each level of production. And here TC, that is the total cost. And we should fill the column of profit and the column of the marginal cost and see and look to the data. So here we complete the total cost column and we compute the profit. The profit is, as you know, total revenue minus total cost. So here, when the quantity produced is 0, the profit is minus 5. When the quantity produced is 1, the profit is 1, so, and etc. When the quantity produced is 5, the profit is 5. But when the quantity produced is 4, the profit is 7. So you see here the profit depends on the quantity produced. The marginal cost column is the change, as you know, the change in total cost per unit produced. It's the change in total cost over the change in quantities. And here we have in the marginal cost column, we completed the data about the marginal cost. Okay. The change in the profit is total revenue minus total cost. So the change in total profit would be equal to the marginal revenue minus marginal cost. So, and we complete this data. So what we observe, at any Q with the marginal revenue greater than marginal cost, increasing Q raises profits. So you see here we have marginal revenue. When the marginal revenue is higher than the marginal cost, like here, increasing the quantity Q raises profit. You see here the profit is raising by $6. When the marginal revenue is 10 and the marginal cost is 6, the profit increases by 4. When when we pass from number of units 2 to number of units 3, still the marginal revenue is higher than the marginal cost, and the price and the profit rises by 2. When we pass from 3 units to 4 units, the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost, and the profit does not change. However, when we pass from 4 units to 5 units, the marginal revenue becomes less than the marginal cost, that is 12, and the marginal revenue is 10. So this makes the change in the profit equals to minus 2. So here, when the marginal revenue is less than the marginal cost, we lose part of our profits. So it's better to not producing the 5th unit and come back and reduce the number of units produced to 4 units, because when we produce this 5th unit, our profit, the firm's profit, decreased by -2. So at any Q with MR less than MC, reducing Q raises profit. Okay, the profit was 7 and became 5 if we produced the unit number 5. Marginal cost and firm's supply decisions. So here we take in this graph where the y-axis is costs and the x-axis quantities Q, we trace the marginal cost curve. A simple form. Of course, the marginal cost curve, you know from the previous chapter, it has U-shaped curve, but here to make it things simple, we will take this simple form as a straight line, MC, for the marginal cost. So the price, P1, it is given by the market, so it is fixed price, and it is equal to the margin, and the price is also the marginal revenue MR. So at QA, you see, if we produce QA, the marginal revenue at QA is greater than the marginal cost of QA. This is the marginal cost of QA. So here the marginal revenue is higher than the marginal cost. So the good decision is to increase the production of the firm. Because we know that by increasing the production, we can increase the profit. So increase Q to raise profits. At QB, if you have this level of production QB, here the opposite happens. The marginal revenue is still the same, P1, but the marginal cost is higher now, is larger than marginal revenue MCB is larger than the marginal revenue. The marginal cost MCB is larger than the marginal revenue. So here the good decision, we are making losses, the firm is making losses by producing quantity QB. So it is the good decision for the firm is to reduce the quantity, the number of units produced, to increase total profit, because a part of our profit is lost when the firm produces QB. So doing so, the firm can get the optimal quantity to be produced, that is meaning the quantity that makes the firm reaching its highest possible profit. This quantity is Q1 here, optimum. And at Q1, you see that the marginal, it is the intersection between the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve, meaning that it is the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So at this point of production, at this level of production Q1, the firm is making its highest profit possible. So it is maximizing its profit. So we can understand from this graphic example that a firm is maximizing its profit when it produces a level of production Q at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So here we determine a rule. It's called the output rule, meaning this rule tells the level of production at which the firm maximizes profit, and this rule is marginal revenue equals marginal cost at the profit maximizing Q. So when marginal revenue equals the marginal cost, the firm can find the level of production Q that maximizes its profit. So if you are a businessman, to come back to our previous scenario, you are a businessman and you want to know how much units of production you should make, how much unit of output you should produce. To be able to find this number, you can find it by equalizing it by finding the quantity Q at which your marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this problem here is solved graphically. We can solve it also using algebra. Algebra also helpful to determine this output rule. So we define our equation, profit equation, here defined as pi that is function of Q, the quantity of production. The profit pi is equal to total revenue minus total cost. Each function depends on Q. In algebra, maximizing a function means that the derivative of this function is equal to 0. So it means maximizing the profit means that the derivative of the profit function with respect to Q is equal to 0. The derivative of this function pi is equal to the derivative of total revenue function minus the derivative of total cost function should equal to 0. This means derivative of total revenue with respect to Q is called marginal revenue minus the derivative of total cost with respect to Q is called marginal cost. Okay, this makes us writing this rule. The profit is maximized when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is also how using algebra can also help us finding the rule of output that maximizes firm's profit. The firm is maximizing its profit when its marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We know that the marginal revenue is also the price, is equal to the price. So we can rewrite our rule. The output rule Q star for a firm in a competitive market is when marginal revenue at Q star equals the marginal cost at Q star is equal to the price. So this equation, solving this equation, we determine Q star that maximizes the quantity that maximizes the profit of the firm.